Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Welcome back to the program. It's nice to be back this Monday morning, and we'll continue with our reading and discussion of the book, The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. We're talking about the use of idolatry, the practice of idolatry by the Jesuit order in order to win converts, as it were, in India. Converts to Christianity, they call it. And now, before I even begin, I want to impress upon my listeners the charges that are brought against these Jesuits for practicing Hinduism and for practicing, even in China, Confucianism, and engaging in all the religious the native religious practices, all of the idolatry and everything as a pretense to be all things to all men in order to win souls for Christ. That's how the Jesuits excuse their idolatry. Now, don't forget that while we're talking about the idolatry, the rank, brazen, apparent, and undenied idolatry of the Jesuits, they're being condemned by the Roman Catholic Church, the church of idolatry, that reduces God to a man-made image and idol, reduces Jesus to a statue and bows down and worships it, and makes a deity out of Mary, and likewise makes deity out of all the so-called saints of the Roman Catholic Church, where images and idols are made in their likeness, and kneelers are placed before them so that people may come and kneel and pray to these gods and goddesses. The Roman Catholic Church is called a Christian church, and it boggles the mind how it passes for a Christian church. Yet it does, and the world seeks to unite with it. Particularly those who understand the error of idolatry, still continue to view the Roman Catholic Church as a Christian church, and that there be no division in the Christian faith, and that we might all have peace and unity with the Roman Catholic Church as a means to advance the Christian religion. The whole world is conducting the same error as the Jesuits are described to do right here in this book. What we see in our reading of these activities by the Jesuits, these idolatrous activities of the Jesuits in accepting Hinduism and Confucianism as just another method of worshiping the one true God, is the foundation of ecumenism today, the unification of all the world's religions under one ecclesiastical or spiritual head, that is the Pope of Rome. The Jesuits are the creators of ecumenism. And as successful as the ecumenical movement is in this country, only then can one comprehend just how faithless Christianity is in this country today, how idolatrous it has become. The purpose of reading all this is to open the eyes of God's people to the error of ecumenism, the error of Jesuitism, the error of the Roman Catholic Church, the recognition that the papacy is the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, and that to have peace with God, to have His protection, we must separate ourselves from it. Separate ourselves from the Church of Rome, from all the other pagan religions of the world, and even from our own churches, if they insist on continuing on this course of ecumenism with the Roman Catholic cult. Now, backing up one paragraph from where we left off Friday, again, we're talking about the boast of the Jesuit order, the phony boast of the Jesuit order about how many converts to Christianity they made in India. He says the pretense of the Jesuits, therefore, that immense numbers of converts to Christianity were made by them must have been entitled to no higher credit than their other professions. At all events, the acknowledged authors of a system of falsehoods and deceptions are not entitled to our confidence. It is possible, however, that they may have succeeded in baptizing in secret a few of the natives, and that some Brahmins were among them. But if they did, it is quite certain that the ceremony must have been administered by stealth, and generally so that those who were baptized had no distinct knowledge of what it meant, and may not have even known the time of its administration. At no point in the Jesuit missionary system has more harm been done to the cause of true Christianity than at this. Millions of ignorant and deluded people have been persuaded to believe that Christianity consisted in nothing else but the mere ceremony of baptism, without any intelligent conception of God. Francis Xavier commenced this system in India, and these Jesuit Brahmins who followed Nobili were his imitators. Taking all the accounts together, the number of converts in India was simply enormous. And yet, in 1776, after the Jesuits had left there, remember the Jesuits were suppressed in 1773, and I'm tempted to believe that this date recorded in the book 1776 as being the year the Jesuits left India might be a typo in the book. But nonetheless, even if it was 3 years before the suppression of the Jesuits took effect in India, it says, yet in 1776, after the Jesuits had left there, a very small percentage of their estimated numbers were found. That is, those who were saved. In other words, their Christianity, as given to them by the Jesuits, had no longevity at all. Okay? Look, you don't convert someone to Jesus Christ by wiping a wet rag over the forehead of a dying child, or anyone else for that matter, without having any understanding at all of what Jesus Christ is, and what God is, and what Christianity is. And never lose sight of the fact, as well, apologetic sometimes, as R.W. Thompson seems to be in this book toward the Roman Catholic Church. It's not a Christian church. Okay? They don't represent Christ. They represent Antichrist, the Pope. Now he continues, he says, but these exaggerations are more excusable than the methods adopted to impose baptism upon unsuspecting and simple-minded multitudes. The German historian Steinmetz, alluding to this, says, quote, they insinuate themselves as physicians into the houses of the Indians, draw a wet cloth over the head and forehead of the sick person, even when at the point of death, muttered privately to themselves the baptism service, and think they have made one Christian more, who was immediately added to the list, unquote. So you can see the method of conversion to Christianity the Jesuits use. They wait till a person's on his deathbed, and they give him what the Roman Catholic Church describes as extreme unction. Okay? One of the sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church, where the priest comes in and blesses the dead person, absolving them of their sins so that they spend less time in purgatory, and hopefully, by the way, to get a big endowment for the church. But anyway, this deathbed baptism, merely consisting of wiping a wet rag over the forehead while the Jesuit priest mutters some holy prayer under his breath, is said to be what converted these Indians to quote-unquote Christianity. Now it says, the Jesuit de Burgess is represented by him as saying, quote, when the children are in danger of death, our practice is to baptize them without asking the permission of their parents, which would certainly be refused. The catechists and the private Christians are well acquainted with the formula of baptism, and they confer it on these dying children under the pretext of giving them medicine, unquote. That is, by that kind of pious fraud which, according to the Jesuits, promotes, quote, the greater glory of God, ad majorem Dei gloriam, right? So they don't even tell them they're being baptized. Or for what? They just wipe a wet rag over their head and then mark them down as a convert to Christianity. And all of this is to bloat the boast of the Jesuits as one of the most effective, if not the most effective, missionaries in the Roman Catholic Church. Now it says another Jesuit father whose experience in India enabled him to speak advisedly mentions one woman, quote, whose knowledge of the pulse and of the symptoms of approaching death was so unerring that of more than 10,000 children whom she had herself baptized, not more than 2 escaped death, unquote. So here's a woman who has an innate talent at being able to smell death, to know when someone is going to die. And this is when she avails herself of the opportunity of baptizing these people. And she's so talented at predicting someone's death that only 2 have survived of those that she predicted would die. Now, you might know that the Jesuits wished to obtain this much ability to predict someone's dying, so that they would be there like a vulture with their wet rag in hand, right? Now it says, the number of such baptisms during the famine of 1737 are alleged by still another Jesuit to have been upwards of 12,000. And he supplements this statement by saying that, quote, it was rare in any place where there were neophytes for a single heathen child to die unbaptized, unquote. Now it says, looking over this whole field of Jesuit operations and contemplating the demoralizing influences of the Jesuits in India, this same German historian Steinmetz feels himself warranted in saying that, quote, every Jesuit who entered within these unholy bounds bid adieu or farewell to principle and truth. All became perjured impostors, and the lives of all ever afterwards were but one long, persevering, toilsome lie. Unquote. Lie. That's how you would describe the Jesuit order. A lie. Now, it would be a fruitless task to summarize the pretexts invented by the Jesuits to convince ignorant and superstitious people that God not only approved but directly sanctioned the frauds and perjuries they practiced in His name, and that He had specially and divinely set them apart, distinct from any other body of people in the world, to demonstrate how, quote, the greater glory of God, ad majorem Dei gloriam, could be promoted by such iniquities. If the line could be accurately drawn between their good and evil deeds, it would be most instructive to observe how enormously the latter exceeded the former. There was no trouble whatsoever for a Jesuit sannyasi to assume the character of a Christian and an idolatrous Hindu almost at the same instant of time, in which dual capacity he could perform miracles like those of Francis Xavier with the ease and skill of a modern prestidigitator, that is, someone who conjures things. Look, no one should marvel that the Jesuits find something in common with idolaters like Hindus and those who worship Confucius in China. They are too idolaters. They are also idolaters. So is the Roman Catholic Church. And it says, they even held the wildest animals. It's said of them, that the Jesuits, that they even held the wildest animals at bay by the odor of sanctity which encircled them. That's right, the animals. The wild beasts of the field, tigers and lions and bears, oh my. You know, they could smell the holiness of these Jesuits, and they left the Jesuits alone. You see how the Jesuits have taken advantage upon credulous people, simple and superstitious, and foisted their holiness upon them by these examples, these stories. It says they even held the wildest animals at bay by the odor of sanctity which encircled them. One of them states that when traveling at night with his companions, a large tiger was discovered approaching them when, by simply crying out, Sancta Maria, in other words, Holy Mother, Holy Mary, the ferocious animal became terrified and moved away, showing, quote, by the grinding of his teeth how sorry he was to let such a fine prey escape, unquote. Another, to show how Providence, capital P, overshadowed and shielded the Jesuits, said, quote, that when heathens and Christians happened to be together, the tigers devoured the former without doing any harm to the faithful, these last finding armor of proof in the sign of the cross and in the holy name of Jesus and Mary, unquote. In other words, they gave credit to their Christian faith and their use of the sign of the cross and the invocation of Mary, and then the beasts of the field showing deference to them and eating the heathens and leaving the Christians, these idolatrous Catholics, alone. He says such superstitious tales as these are told, and many pretended miracles added to them, with a seeming unconsciousness upon the part of those who relate them, that the world has reached a period when the truth can be discovered even through all the disguises which falsehood and deception may throw around it. To those who have not investigated the history of the Jesuits, as written by themselves, these accusations may seem harsh and unmerited. Not so, however, to those who have. No matter where they went, the obligation of being all things to all men was held to be obligatory upon every member of the society. Obedience to the Jesuit general was the highest virtue, notwithstanding it may have involved violations of God's law, of morality, and of society. How else could confessed Christians pretend to be engaged in the practice of virtue by denying Christ, disavowing his worship, and habitually practicing the debasing rites of the Hindu religion for more than a century, as Mobili and his Jesuit followers and imitators did? And let us not forget that Rome does the very same thing. In the complete absence of any history of the Jesuits, looking strictly at Orthodox Roman Catholicism, as it is demanded by the Roman Catholic Church, to be viewed as it is no less idolatrous than the Hindus in India or the Confucianists of China, except that they use Jesus Christ as its God, which they have reduced to an image and an idol, just like the Hindus and the Chinese. And it says, and what other possible pretext can be offered for the Jesuit worship of Confucius in China, in religious confraternity with the natives, who made their public ceremonies and festivities special testimonials of their adoration of him as the founder of their national religion and the chief among the gods of their idolatry? We shall see how these things were by the proceedings, we shall see how these things were by the proceedings which led to their condemnation by the popes, although the Jesuit historians who are forced to acknowledge them try hard to show that the pontifical censure was not deserved. Dorignac, the ablest of the Jesuit defenders, referring to the course of Nobili and the others who practiced idolatrous rites, says, quote, "Some Europeans have been scandalized by this method of appearing to be all things to all men in order to win all to Christ," unquote. This sentence is misleading in this, that instead of there being merely some who felt scandalized, there were multitudes throughout Europe. The ecclesiastical authorities at Goa in India were also of this number, and when the complaint reached there that Nobili, quote, had become a Brahmin and given himself up to idolatry and superstition, unquote, he was summoned to Goa to explain his conduct. He could not disobey this summons, and when he reached there, quote, the sight of his singular costume elicited a general expression of indignation, unquote, among the Christians. In other words, he boldly showed up at this inquest appearing in full Hindu dress. Okay? No sign of repentance. The Jesuits know no such thing as repentance. Remember, their general speaks with the voice of God, and every Jesuit obeys him without thinking, without questioning, and immediately. So this Jesuit appears to this summons wearing his full Hindu dress. And it says, when required to explain by the Archbishop of Goa, as the official representative of the Roman Catholic Church appointed by the Pope for that purpose, the only defense he could make was that his motives were good. That is, that the prostitution of himself and his sacred calling was well meant, because his object was to promote, quote, the greater glory of God, unquote. Yes, the greater glory of God is served by reducing oneself to idolatry. And of course, again, in this case, it's reducing oneself to the idolatrous Hindu, never mind that Roman Catholicism is the epitome of idolatry in the world. Now, the Jesuits at Goa accepted his reasons, quote, as sufficient, unquote, says Dorignac, the historian. There are two methods of accounting for this. First, they were Jesuits. And second, because Nobili's method of falsehood and deception opened to them new and extensive fields of operation, which, if recognized, they could occupy with great success in extending the power of their society. But the Archbishop thought otherwise, and absolutely refused, says the historian, to accept Nobili's reasons as satisfactory. Accordingly, speaking for the Church and the Pope, as he was authorized and empowered to do, he condemned the conduct of Nobili and the reasons he assigned. Nobili, quote, asserted that the truths of the gospel could not have been introduced to Madura by any other means, unquote, but the Archbishop refused to accept his excuse, evidently regarding it as a debasing doctrine aimed at the very foundation of Christianity. The Jesuits insist that they can't promote Christianity unless they use idolatry among the idolatrous people. That's ecumenism. We'll be back right after this.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get Left Behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. If you like Inquisition Update, please support it by supporting First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. Nicholas pays the bills. I can't afford this airtime. Nicholas sees the value of the program and just simply trusts God and relies upon God's people to see its value also and be led by the Spirit to support it financially to keep it on the air. We're not commercially sponsored for obvious reasons. The truth is not palatable to the corporate world, so God's people have to shoulder the weight, the load, and to help support the program. If you like Inquisition Update, please support First Amendment Radio. And also, if you'd like to make comments or ask questions, you may contact me directly by email at tom@seawaves.us. That's tom@seawaves.us. Now, this Jesuit priest, Nobili, is being examined for the reasons why he has adopted Hinduism in word and deed in order to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. I mean, obviously, even Nobili has stretched the credulity of the Vatican in this case. And so this Roman Catholic prelate is there to condemn Nobili for his quote-unquote idolatry. Now, Nobili replies that the truths of the gospel could not have been introduced into Madura by any other means, unquote. That you cannot promote the gospel of Jesus Christ in a foreign pagan land by any other means but that by adopting the idolatrous practices of the pagan nation. I mean, is that what missionary work is all about? Going about all the world and literally becoming members of these pagan societies and practicing their pagan religion and learning how to be pagans? That's what this Jesuit Nobili did. That's what all Jesuits do. As a matter of fact, they're just as happy to be in a so-called Protestant church and to look like a Protestant, to talk like a Protestant, to literally be a Protestant, while at the same time conquering them secretly. And that's what they accomplished through this ecumenical movement. What they've done in the Protestant churches is no different than what Nobili is doing here among the Hindus, and what other Jesuits have done among the Confucians, the Chinese, the worship Confucius. They literally can adopt whatever religion they wish, as long as it serves their order. This is global ecumenism. The Jesuits have been practicing ecumenism almost since their founding. Now, during the time of the Protestant Reformation, the reformers would be giving all these examples that R.W. Thompson is giving in this book to convince the Protestant world that the Roman Catholic Church is just as idolatrous as these Jesuits are in India and in China. The Protestant reformers would be using this example to highlight the very same idolatry in the Roman Catholic Church. But where is any condemnation of the idolatry in the Roman Catholic Church today, in this ecumenical world? I mean, we can't condemn the Jesuits by reading this book and exposing their idolatry without likewise condemning the Christian version of idolatry, the so-called Christian version of idolatry. Idolatry is forbidden by the Creator. And He doesn't care one whit whether one calls oneself a Hindu or a Confucian or a Catholic. God will not be reduced to a man-made image or idol. You cannot comprehend the incorruptible God of glory by making an image with the hands of man and bowing down and worshiping it. Nothing truthful about the God of glory can be expressed in a man-made image. It's impossible. And that's why God forbid man to blind himself by making a man-made image and bowing down and worshiping it. It's like walling off God with a concrete wall. I remember not too many years ago, a Catholic with whom I was friends, who I was thought I had made progress in conveying to him who God is and what God is. Simply at a time of weakness said, Tom, I just simply cannot believe in a God that I can't see with my eyes. Now that's the error of idolatry. You can't worship God if you have to see Him to worship Him. And the answer to this is idolatry. To make an image or an idol out of wood, stone, gold, or silver, or some other precious material, and call it a god that can't see, can't hear, can't walk, can't talk, can't answer prayer, can't even get up and move from place to place, and can't even wipe the dust off his own nose. It's incomprehensible that anyone who calls himself a Christian would bow down and worship an image or an idol, or even to equivocate and say that I'm not worshiping this image or idol, but that I'm worshiping the true God through this image or idol, as if this man-made thing can somehow transport one's worship to God. The God of heaven, who knows all and sees all and even comprehends the contents of our hearts, knows our needs before we ever even express them, can be communicated to by images and idols, or through images and idols. It literally blinds us to who He is. It blinds us to His power, blinds us to His holiness, blinds us to everything that He is. The second commandment. The first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. And the second commandment was just like it, forbidding the making and bowing down to images and idols. Now, the Roman Catholic Church, the church of idolatry, the church that makes a practice out of bowing down and worshiping images and idols as a means to communicate to God, is now chastising this Nobili, this Jesuit priest, for adopting the idolatrous rituals and practices of the Hindus. I don't want my listeners to miss this point. It's the pot calling the kettle black. Okay? What does the Bible say? Out of thy words shalt thou be justified, and out of thine own words shalt thou be condemned. Here is the Roman Catholic Church condemning itself by condemning Nobili, the Jesuit idolater. He says Nobili asserted that the truths of the gospel could not have been introduced to Madura by any other means. But the Archbishop refused to accept this excuse, evidently regarding it as a debasing doctrine aimed at the very foundation of Christianity. He thought Christianity would suffer by this unorthodox practice of this Jesuit of being an idolater. How can Christianity suffer when Christianity has been reduced to an idolatrous religion by the Roman Catholic Church? Look, the point of all of this is that we must stop calling Catholicism Christianity. It's not Christianity. Catholicism is just the idolatrous form adopted by those who wish to call themselves Christians, but maintain their idolatrous practices. Mixing the holy with the profane. Mixing the holy name of God with idolatry. This is exactly why the Jews were repeatedly punished by God for mixing His name with idols. That's what Catholicism does. And it's going to suffer the same plagues, the same judgments that God leveled against the idolatrous Jews. That's why Revelation chapter 18 verse 4 says, come out of her, my people, that you partake not of her sins, you partake not of her idolatry, and that you receive not also of her plagues. Now, here we have a standoff between this idolatrous Jesuit and this idolatrous Roman Catholic prelate. And R.W. Thompson says, neither one would yield. Nobili, backed by the Jesuits, insisted that he was under no obligation to obey this archbishop, although he acted under the special authority of the Church and the Pope, and the result was that the matter had to be sent to Rome and a decision of the Pope awaited. In the meantime, Nobili returned to Madura, where he continued his idolatrous practices, notwithstanding the censure of the Archbishop of Goa was resting upon him, and he was thereby placed in the attitude of disobedience to the legitimate authority of the Church. Jesuit ingenuity was not sufficient to limit the scope of the inquiry thus brought before the Pope and the Papal Curia at Rome because of the increasing indignation against the society, the Jesuits. Added to the complaints of the Portuguese authorities regarding their conduct in Paraguay and that of Nobili in Madura, their idolatrous worship of Confucius in China came generally to be known about this time. Consequently, the investigation which it became necessary for the Pope to make had not only increased in importance, but became broader almost every day. Not only were the matters involved important to the Church, but to the cause of Christianity throughout the world. Imagine this. And it says, for it was easy to foresee the injurious and demoralizing results if the Jesuits permitted to mingle Christian and idolatrous worship together so as to make it appear to every heathen nation, to every heathen people within the limits of their missions, that Christianity sanctions both forms of worship in the same degree. You see what calling Roman Catholicism Christianity does? People see the idolatry of Roman Catholicism, and by that they judge Christianity to be no better than any other religion. You know, it's Rome's boast that it's the Church of Jesus Christ outside of which there is no salvation. And yet they're no less idolatrous than the most heathen people on the planet. Look what damage they've done to Christianity simply because we insist on calling it a Christian religion. Just another denomination of the Judeo-Christian religion. Stop and think about this, too. What was the Judeo religion? Was it not idolatrous? They offered the blood of lambs and goats and sheep, and when Jesus Christ came to be their lamb, they rejected him and went back to offering animal sacrifices again. At that point, it became idolatry. At that point, it was clear to God and the whole rest of the world that they valued their bloody sacrifices of lambs and goats more than the blood of Jesus Christ. And that's what the Roman Catholic Church does with the Mass. It rejects Jesus Christ and offers another sacrifice, another man-made sacrifice. Here we have the Jesuits being condemned for their idolatry by the Church of Idolatry. And the whole world calls it Christianity. He says, consequently, it became necessary for the Pope to examine and decide both questions at the same time. That is, whether the Church could rightfully tolerate either the adoption and practice of the Hindu rites by the Jesuits in India or their participation in the idolatrous worship of Confucius in China. This is where Rome is trying to decide. Is it right for these Jesuits to practice these Hindu rites and these Confucian rites in China? Is it beginning to become clear to my listeners what Roman Catholicism really is? Look, they don't call it the universal religion for nothing. Ecumenism makes it the universal religion. The religion where every religion can be practiced so long as it is under the auspices of the Pope. Now do you see how ridiculous it is to call Roman Catholicism Christianity? Never mind that Rome has always been an idolatrous religion. The Roman Catholic Church has always been an idolatrous religion, simply by replacing the Christ with the Pope. Not to mention the images and idolatry that have been practiced by Rome since the earliest days of its existence. Rome is that great apostasy of which Paul spoke, the great falling away. He says, among the notable events connected with the latter was the arrival in China of some Dominican and Franciscan missionaries and their surprise at discovering the idolatrous practices of the Jesuits. I wonder why the Dominicans and Franciscans were so shocked and surprised at the idolatrous practices of the Jesuits when they practiced a like idolatry in their own monkish domains. One form of idolatry condemning another form of idolatry. That's what this is. If one's not careful, one can use R.W. Thompson's language as if Roman Catholicism isn't as idolatrous as is Confucianism or Hinduism. He says, having never suspected even the possibility of the teachings of the Church being so tortured as to furnish apology for idolatry, they considered the conduct of the Jesuits a real scandal, which deserved to be rebuked. What seemed to them as especially censurable was the fact that the Jesuits had taught their neophytes to use the Chinese term King Tian to express the idea of God, not as the creator of the universe, but as the presiding deity over a multitude of other deities, each having a separate sphere of sovereignty. Okay, in the Chinese language, the word King Tian represents this universal deity that is the deity of other subordinate deities. Now, the Roman Catholic Church regarded this as idolatry. But this is the very same system that they have used to degrade Christianity. You see, in the Roman Catholic Church, we have the Pope, who is the voice of God on earth. And beneath him, we have Mary, okay? Another God, another deity of the Roman Catholic Church. And then all the saints of the Roman Catholic Church, each having their own liturgical day on the calendar, and each being represented by some physical means, a statue, an image, or an idol. And they've just simply made God the King Tian over this entire litany of minor gods. The Jesuits were simply doing in China what Roman Catholicism did to Christianity. He said what seemed to them as especially censurable was the fact that the Jesuits had taught their neophytes to use the Chinese term King Tian to express the idea of God, not as the creator of the universe, but as the presiding deity over a multitude of other deities, each having a separate sphere of sovereignty. A separate sphere of sovereignty. What was it? The Roman Catholic Saint Francis, who had his own sphere of sovereignty over, animals? I mean, every one of these Roman Catholic saints become patrons of some deified realm. They call them patron saints. And they're worshipped as a deity over their realm. Saint Francis over the birds and the bees. Another saint over newlyweds. Another saint over travelers. Another saint over, farmers. And that sort of thing. A pantheon of gods. That's what Roman Catholicism has done to Christianity. The very, very same thing that the Chinese did under the term King Tian. That there is one major god that oversees a pantheon of lesser gods beneath him. And the Jesuits have taught their Chinese neophytes to use the term King Tian to express the idea of God, not as the creator of the universe, but as the presiding deity over a multitude of other deities, each having a separate sphere of sovereignty. It's to them, it was not easy to conceive of anything more likely to undermine Christianity because by limiting or lessening in any way the sovereign attitudes of God, the whole Christian system would topple and fall. Imagine the blindness of this. He says they accordingly notified the apostolic vicar in China, as the immediate representative of the church there, of this unscrupulous and unchristian conduct of the Jesuits, in order, if possible, to apply the proper corrective and remove the scandal, the quote-unquote scandal, from the Roman Catholic Church. He says the vicar did not have much to do to discover that the accusations of the monks against the Jesuits was true. And when this became known to him, he not only condemned their idolatry, but severely censured them for practicing it. God's going to severely censure the Roman Catholic Church for practicing it, too. The Roman Catholic Church has been condemned by its own actions. They condemn the Jesuits for an idolatry that is practiced also within the Roman Catholic Church, just under another blasphemous head like Ignatius Loyola, who calls himself divine and infallible, the representative of God on earth, and commands all his faithful to worship Mary and the saints and statues and uphold his authority in the world, both spiritually and temporally, at the cost of multitudes, innumerable millions of lives throughout history. He says the Jesuits, by way of defense, attempted to explain why they had applied an idolatrous Chinese term to the God of the Christians, and in doing so exhibited their accustomed sophistry, in which they have always been adepts, in such way as to convince the vicar, as well as the Dominican and Franciscan monks, of their entire want of sincerity and candor, to say nothing of their loss of Christian integrity. Loss of Christian integrity. These Jesuits lost their Christian integrity by becoming idolaters. Rome is proving that she is every bit as idolatrous as the Jesuits, because the Roman Catholic Church has elected a Jesuit to be the Pope, and this ecumenical movement is almost complete. Idolatry in Jesus' name. That's what Roman Catholicism is. I'll be back tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.